Hello everyone, this is Defense Politics Asia, and this is the summary for the past 2 days, because yesterday I missed the timing, the window to do it, so today I have to do 2 days. But it's okay, because today also there's no Russian Defense Ministry's SITREP, so we're gonna have but we still have it from the yesterday one. So anyway, doesn't matter. I don't think you care. So anyway, let's go on from the south. So we're back to the southern flank. Over the south, we have fighting being reported again at the Antonovsky Bridge, basically Dachi, according to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. Again, we still have no visuals that come out from this region to confirm the reports. Shelling is reported at Mikhailsk and Kostyantynivka from the Russian Defense Ministry's yesterday's report, but that's about it. The Kherson front is still pretty much a dead zone. We go on to the Zaporizhzhia front. Oh, very slow. The loading is a bit slow. So this is Zaporizhzhia, and so this is the Zaporizhzhia front. We go to focus over on the two front lines, the two sectors, the Oskil and the Kayamsky sector. So this is Kayamsky. This is Kharkiv. So not Oskil, Kharkiv. So at the Kayamsky sector, fighting is reported at Primorsk, Stepnohursk, and Stepove. On the Kharkiv side, Russian forces are attacking Novoandrievka and Malatomachka. So the main action is always along the Dnieper River, but the push is not very strong. Tentatively, I think the Ukrainians' military capability is not entirely faded yet. As such, the Russians are still pretty much stuck in this region. The Ukrainians have a lot of strong positions around here that can support the operations in Primorsk and Stepnohursk. So which means that the Russians area here, the push is not going to be very easy. Not to mention the Ukrainians actually have Kharkiv as well, Yukivka, and this will allow them to counter the Russians' attacks in this region. Whereas for the Russians, there is the HQ is not as strong as the Ukrainians one, which means it's a bit hard. Russians probably is operating out of maybe Robertine. That's a possibility. But yeah, from this side, maybe it's over at Verkhnya Krinitsia. So and Vasilievka. So this is the areas that they are operating from. Yeah, so this is pretty stalemate-ish at this moment by the look of it. So we go on to the Hulyaipole sector. So at the Hulyaipole sector, very busy. Let me see, how do I cut this? No. So fighting at Hulyaipole continues. The battle for Hulyaipole is now three-pronged. Russians have been geolocated to have attacked from the north as well as from the east. Not to mention from the northeast that is already previously geolocated. So Hulyaipole is attacked in multiple places. The Russians seems to be also closing a bit, starting to push south of Hulyaipole from Mariupol, maybe. There's fighting reported at Vavarivka, geolocation of Russian forces off the Propilia. There's fighting over there. Sive, Ternuvati are both shelled. Fighting is reported at Nove, Zaporizhzhia, Zdahoda, Krasnyhersky, Rybny, Solotke, and Privyone. So this shelling here might suggest that that these are Ukrainians' forward operating bases or HQs, which allows them to support the operations into the rear in this sector here. It looks like the Russians still do not have a strong position or strong defense along this area. So yeah, the Russians probably, their operating HQ is probably around here in this sector here, allows them to support the operations in this area. Fighting for Vavarivka is to cut off the road in the north, and they are trying to take to Propilia, which would be a good candidate for the next HQ. Vavarivka also probably is a good one. The battle for Hulyaipole continues. We shall see how this goes. So it is a very strong position. However, it's also just a frontline town right now. Because the situation, this is already a front line. It's just like the situation in the battle for Bakhmut, where it used to be a very strategically important city. when the front line is far away. But when the war battles goes into Bakhmut is merely just another frontline town. And this is the situation for Hulyaipole as well. It's now just a frontline town. But what the strategic value actually lies for the Russians. If the Russians take Hulyaipole, this will allow the Russians to build a very powerful forward operating position or HQ where they can operate from and then continue their offensive into the rest of the Zaporizhzhia region. That is the strategically important part of it. So if the Russians can secure it, then it will become super useful. But for the Ukrainians, this merely is now just another another front line where they will have to defend, because losing it will cost them more. This happens for Voleda, this happens for Avdiivka, this happens for Bakhmut, so all these places when they fall, or even earlier, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, all these places when they fall, the Ukrainians will find it impossible to hold a forward line. They'll have to fall back to the next line of defense where they can hold the front line. So that's the situation over in the Hulyaipole. Further up to the Dnipro front. So the Dnipro front, we have fighting reported at Andriivka, Privilia, Vishneve, Verbove, Sosnivka, Vorone, Shifneve, Oleksandrograd, and Zeleny High. But I have to also note that it might all look like a red arrows, but the thing is that no one reports on Ukrainian attacks, which means that when the Ukrainians do counter attack, we actually don't see it on the map, because the Russians only very occasionally talks about Ukrainian attacks, and the Ukrainians only talk about Russian attacks. So as a result, you always have a lot of red arrows. But with our new model of trying to analyze the situation, I think we can actually see much better that Ukrainians are recently on counter-offensive operations. Maybe they feel very insulted by what happened with Donald Trump and Putin, because all these negotiations without Ukraine on the table is very insulting to them, and all these PR failures is getting to them. So probably the Ukrainians are trying to capture ground and try to like the situation in Kupyansk, which we'll cover it later. So anyway, from this area here, Ukrainians have a few bases. Veliko Mikhailivka, the forest in Lizny. They have Piharevlivka and Herlivka, Pokrovsk and Oleksandrivka. All these are all the Ukrainian bases which they operate from, this is what I think they operate from. So this allows the Ukrainians to keep the Russians stuck at Zeleny High. From Lizny, they continue to infiltrate into Oleksandrograd, Shifneve. From Veliko Mikhailivka, they go to Sosnivka, Vorone, and from Pokrovsk, Oleksandrivka, they can go to Andriivka, and they continue to go to all these areas here where the Russians has already claimed capture. But this claim of capture is not solid, because the Russians are unable to put soldiers in those positions. So as a result, when they take the photo, the videos of them waving the flag or operating those positions, they have to withdraw to go back to sleep, right? So they are all humans. So and not necessarily every village is suitable to sit there. And if you sit there but you're not watching, you're not keeping a lookout, then Ukrainian soldiers may ambush you and capture you, like what happened previously over in the situation with Stepove, where the Ukrainians basically came in and sneaked in and captured a few Russian soldiers, because the Russian soldiers probably never expected them to appear. So, and this is a bit far from the front line. So situation remains, I think, pretty static for now. I think the Russians are not actually pushing, and the Ukrainians actually may have retaken quite a number of positions. I think like High, Novo Alexandrivka, Vidratne are all question mark right now. That I'm not entirely sure if the Russians actually is holding those positions, given the fact that the Ukrainian side constantly talks about Verbove, Vishneve, So we shall see how this continue to play out. So because of this new analysis, the reporting is going to sound a lot more balanced. Like, it's not going to sound like, it will make the Ukrainian sounds a lot more capable than previously my reporting is going to sound. And it's not me also flipping on any side. I'm still neutral. It's just that we have to give some explanation into why things is being reported the way it is from the both Russian and Ukrainian side, and how things sometimes don't make sense. So for example, the geolocation, sometimes the operations that we think that the Russians is going to push, but they don't push. We have to find explanation to it, and I think so far with this new model where we try to track where is a possible forward operating bases, the HQ, I think that is the one of the very good way to try to understand the situation. The Russians' main push right now, probably is want to take Andriivka, but whether they can get there is another story altogether. The Russian probably have Yehorevka, as a base is possible, but the rest of the towns are all very small and small villages. We shall see where the Russians, can, build from. The Ukrainian strongholds are all very strong. They are all bigger towns and perhaps mini cities, and the Russians all have villages. So tentatively, this sector looks pretty stuck. But of course, the Russians do not plan to conquer Dnipro. That's another thing. So which also may reduce the Russians' intention to push harder into this sector. So anyway, that's all from the Dnipro front. Over into the northern flank, or rather the western flank of Pokrovsk. Just now we already mentioned Zeleny High. Novopalivka is still being reported. There's fighting reported also in Kotline, Udashne, Bolondetsky, and Novopihorodny. Generally, as usual, these are all static lines. And Novopalivka has one date. We have no idea what the hell is happening right here now. There is no information about this place for quite some time now. So, but what would be important is that strategically, if the Russians can take Novopalivka, this will become a very strong position for the Russians, either to choose to push out or to defend. So this is very important. The Ukrainians have Moldova, which allows them to to defend this front line here very effectively, because it's a rather major town here. So we shall see how this goes. Tentatively, I would imagine that the Russians really want to take Novopalivka. But no news means no news. We don't know anything. Moving into the Pokrovsk front. So this is the Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk city is over here. This is Menohrad. So we're not going to zoom in this time around because there's not much new information that came out. Fighting is reported at Khrushchevny, Pokrovsk, according to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, Rivne, Svitle, Minohrad. There is fighting. The Minohrad fighting continues. Ukrainians continue to mention about Novoekonomichny, Shovny, Liman, Rodinsky, Sukhetsk, Belitsky, Drozhny. Shelling is reported at Chernikhivka, Pankivka, Volodymyrivka, Shakhove, Sofievka, Toretsky, and Rusinya. So Rusinya is part of the Kostyantynivka front. The main action seems to be the Russians are still wanting to take the whole chain of settlements around here. Nothing special, but the Russians seems to have fully secured Volodymyrivka. So given the latest Ukrainian mapping from that sector, along this line in the north of Pokrovsk, Minohrad, if it is a push, is to go in the direction of Turpopilia. That's the main aim. Ukrainians may have a forward operating base at Chernikhivka. Well, probably this is why there's some shelling reported. The Turpopilia, of course, is the main Ukrainian stronghold in this sector here, which allows them to continue to block the Russians from pushing forward and keep the fighting basically stuck at Sukhetsk, Rodinsky, and Shovny Liman region. Basically, I think the front line is still pretty stuck in this sector. I have no idea how to interpret the Novoekonomichny situation yet. Maybe this linked to Minohrad, but if that's the case, then the Ukrainian soldiers here are pretty sad. There is so fighting for Minohrad continue. The encirclement seems to be very encircled. Ukrainian soldiers from video footages have shown that they are starting to surrender group by group. One by one, they're starting to surrender. Ukrainians' perspective is different. They insist that Pokrovsk is still pretty much a gray zone in the north, where they continue to do operations to try to break the Russian offensive, which I have a lot of doubts about. And so that's the main sector. There is no real by the feel that I get, there is no real fighting for Pokrovsk anymore. The battle is very exclusively at Vinograd. So I know some pro-Ukrainians may start to watch DPA lately because of the Ukraine war clippings, or maybe the Thai Cambodian clippings. What you hear from DPA, from me, might be very, very different from what you watch from the pro-Ukrainian YouTubers. I just want to say they are pro-Ukrainian YouTubers. No, they are pro-Ukraine so their reports are clearly pro-Ukrainian. They probably have a Ukrainian flag in their names, on Twitter or whatnot. But if you want balanced views, that's where you're gonna get from DPA. I'm neutral. I don't give a damn about who wins. I have no allegiance to both Russia or Ukraine because they're literally more or less the same people to me. They are just far away from me. So anyway, everything here I report is fact-based. It's based on information that is reported, that can be confirmed sometimes. So the reality is that the Ukrainians probably don't have a position in Pokrovsk anymore. So, but they are in Vinograd, but situation is dire. The pro-Russian reports about the situation in Pokrovsk, Vinograd is more closer to the truth than not. So unfortunately, that's the case. If you feel emotionally damaged, too bad. I don't care. So over in Kostyantynivka, so fighting is reported at Rusinya, Stepanivka, Yablonivka, Plishevka, Ivanopolia, Alexandrovshutine, Shebenivka, Kostyantynivka, as well as Chasiv. Geolocation, there's a geolocation of an armored vehicle. A Max Pro was hit in the south of Kostyantynivka. Rusinya, Stepanivka, Yablonivka is all static position. The Ukrainians, of course, have Kostyantynivka as their main stronghold. So somehow my mouse suddenly feels very different. And they continue to be able to defend the south, causing the front line to get stuck in Ivanopolia and Plishevka, despite the maximum attempts by the Russians to really secure the region, to do a southern flank to wall the south. This have not seemed to work out yet. Similarly, the situation in Chasiv is very similar, where the Russians have not really pushed out or unable to push out Chasiv as well. Ukrainians continue to claim a presence in Shebenivka. This is, of course, a question mark. This is very far away from the front line. I don't think it's pretty legitimate. But yeah, that's the current situation in Kostyantynivka. I think this is pretty much status quo. No change regarding the strategic situation. Moving further up to the rest of the Bakhmut front, we have fighting being reported at Privilia, wrong color, and Minkivka. If the Russians push here, so far there is no clear evidence that the Russians are really pushing very hard for this sector. And even if they take this position, they're gonna, so let's say we've come down, let's say the Russians take these positions, they're still gonna get stuck here because the Ukrainian lines and the canal is all here is very strong, and holding such a forward position is pretty not very safe, to say the least. It's just not safe, to put Russian soldiers in these positions. So they're just going to be targets for FPV drones. So I think tentatively, I don't think the Russians are going to push there unless they are going to go for a very, very big major offensive in the sector. So we go into the Siversk front, or the Liman-Siversk front. Probably it's going to start to become Liman front very soon, because the Russians have confirmed to have captured Siversk. We have tremendous amount of geolocations to confirm the capture of Siversk, and the Russians is starting to push in the direction of Riznikivka from the look of the geolocations. Fighting is reported at Prozhne, Terebryanka, Dronivka, Yampil, Torske, Zarishny, as well as Liman. There's a geolocation of a Russian airstrike, a FAB 3000 massive bomb hitting Liman. Clearly, Liman is a stronghold for the Ukrainians. This is where they operate from, and this is how Zaporizhzhia is still getting stuck there. But the Russians have entered through the forest because the forest cover allows troops movement much more effectively. So which is why you can see the Russians having such a forward position. But on Zaporizhzhia side, the front line pretty much stuck at Zaporizhzhia. So fighting still continue to be reported at Yampil. And the Russians previously was geolocated in Borova, but there's no reports about fighting at Borova. Dronivka, Serbianka, this situation is a bit interesting. I think Russians may be pushing out soon. I think once they set up their HQ over in Siversk, because they just captured it, I think they will take a few days to create a HQ in Siversk. And from this sector, the Russians will start to push out. And then we will see the collapse of the north. Because the salient in the north was unable to be secured because there's no place to hide. There's no place, or no safe place for the Russian soldiers to actually hold a position, which is why it's always a salient in the north. So after Siversk HQ is secured, Russia will start to push. I have done the battlefield analysis of this Siversk front, and we clearly know that most likely the Russians is going to attack Zaporizhzhia and Riznikivka from the north because of the terrain, because it's the high ground in the north. So pushing south, the trenches are all facing the wrong direction. They are all facing southward. So as they expected the Russians to actually push north from this sector, which also explains why this southern push up to Riznikivka and Zaporizhzhia has not been successful, because the trench line is on the slope facing downwards, facing south, which makes it impossible to attack safely. So I think with this rear attack, I think this is gone. Ukrainians will have to form the next line of defense along Kryvyi and Kalenki, and the forward line is going to be along the forest lines just west of Riznikivka. So we're going to see some evolution of the front line pretty soon in this sector, especially once the HQ is entirely up. So that is the current situation in this sector. And once the Russians have Siversk, I think we're going to have and push the front line forward. We're going to just rename this place as Liman Front. So that anyway, then that will be a return of the Liman Front. We're going to move up north from the Liman Siversk Front to the Oskil Front. So this is so there is fighting at Kherson and Dnieper, as I already mentioned, because we're not going to see it again. So over in the Oskil Front, well, this is a bit tight. So fighting is reported over in Kamarzinivka, which is a bit weird because that is a bit far. Fighting is also reported towards Shevenistav, Zuzelyubivka, Kharkivka, Novy Maya, Serine, Shandriholove, Novoselivka, Darilove, Drobisheve, Stavki, Kolozyazi, and towards Oleksandrivka. This sector here, as I always say, is a static line. Usually, might start to have something. The Russians may gonna start some limited offensive in this sector, by the sense of it, but we don't know. But I'm just saying that maybe. But the main action, the main operation, of course, is still along this line. The from Serine all the way to Drobisheve, and the push towards Oleksandrivka. Most likely, the operation is going to focus more within the forest, where the Russians will be able to maneuver. Oh, yeah, sorry, I was using this Pomodoro thing, and the actions here, the Russians want to take out this salient, but the situation in Stavki is not good because this is not a very holdable place, as the Ukrainians can reinforce from Liman easily. And somehow the Russians still fails to take this Drobisheve and this Novoselivka after so long. So is going to be a problem. Ukraine operates from Siversk and Yarova, and however, Yarova is no longer secure, so it's probably only from Siversk. As well, of course, the forest region from Oskil, and of course, Liman is the main problem. So, but anyway, that's the current strategic situation in this sector. It's two different places. As you can see, it's a clear cut between the two sides. So probably different units are commanding the two sides. But we shall see how this goes. Tentatively, it's pretty stalemate at this moment by the look of it. There is some slight frontline change in this sector of Shandri-Holovay, but Shandri-Holovay is announced captured by the Russian Defense Ministry. So let's see. Over in the Borova front. So at the Borova front, just now as mentioned, Shavoni stuff, Druzhilivka, Kamazanivka is all mentioned already. There is also Novoyehorivka, Novoplatonivka, Bohuslavka, and Novokulyakivka. The main action, of course, the Russians want to take Novoplatonivka and kill off the northern salient. This is probably a static line. Novoyehorivka generally is a terrible place to fight in. The Russians, many Russian soldiers died there for very little. So that's the current situation. Ukrainian stronghold is Borova, which is what the Russians want to take. But this also means it's really hard to take this position because the Ukrainians have a strong city to support, and they could potentially still use this bridge that is actually destroyed. But maybe putting some planks will allow them to cross the bridge. I'm not sure. So let's see how this goes. We move further up north to the Kupyansk front. So just now I mentioned I'm going to talk a bit about Kupyansk. So first thing first, strategically, fighting is reported at Stepova, Novoselivka, Pischane, Kurylivka, and Kupyansk Voslovi. And there's also fighting reported in Kupyansk. So this is pretty common. This chain of settlement is pretty much the same thing with Russians really wants to take Kupyansk Voslovi. In the very needle attack, Ukrainians have two salients in this sector here. However, both are not taken just yet. So I want to zoom in on Kupyansk. So for some people may be confused about what the situation of Kupyansk right now is. The Russians' latest geolocation is here, which confirms that the Russians do still have a position on the western bank of the Oskil River. So this green line is the Oskil River. They still have position in the western flank, western bank. The Ukrainians are trying to cut the Russians off and basically create an encirclement in the southwestern part of the city. That is also what the Ukrainians, the pro-Ukrainian space is boasting about. They are very excited about this. Of course, conveniently forget about that they have never considered that Kupyansk was captured in the first place. So they totally pretended that Kupyansk was never captured, and they debunked that the Russians captured Kupyansk. But at the same time, they are excited about the Ukrainians' counterattack, which may lead to some kind of encirclement for the Russian troops, which is a contradiction, right? No, you must lose the place before you can recapture the place. So anyway, that's the situation. Ukrainians most likely have the entire northwest of Kupyansk right now, securing Moskovka, and they are probably trying to push in. This probably what's happening. The Russians still probably have this line in the south, in the center and the south of the western part of Kupyansk. This is probably what happened. On the other side, I believe the Russians may have a much more expanded zone of control than the mapping suggests. So the front line may actually looks a bit like this. So and this looks like a heart. This literally looks like a heart, the shape of a heart. But anyway, not this heart, like the real heart. So anyway, that's all from Kupyansk. So this is the current situation in Kupyansk. So yeah, it's what it is. Going north from this position is the Vorechna front. Not much is happening except fighting is reported at Vorochansky and Kolozyazny. The Russians want Kolozyazny because taking this place will allow them to straighten the front line. Tentatively, they are unable to take this yet. This is a Ukrainian stronghold. So let's wait and see how this goes. We go next to the Kharkiv front. So this is Kharkiv. And at the Kharkiv front, the fighting is still in the Voschan sector. So we're going to zoom in here in this sector. So there is mention of Okremivka again, according to the Russians, very far away, but I don't think there's a real push over there. Fighting is reported towards Ibitske, fighting at Stalemate, Prilipka, Vilsha, Voschansk, Kotori, with the Russian Defense Ministry announced the capture of Liman. So they now claim that this is taken. So I mean, this wouldn't be a surprise because the Russians have a tactical advantage in this sector, and from here the Russians, after securing it, can use it as a base to attack Pokrovsk or Semenivka. Fighting at Voschansk, of course, not entirely sure how this works. Maybe the Ukrainians are counter-attacking. Maybe the Russians do not have a very strong line yet. So we shall see how this goes. Fighting the battle for Vilsha continues, and the push towards Ibitske also continues. So yeah, so generally this is a strategic situation, pretty much the same except for the capture of Liman, or at least claimed capture of Liman. And we go on to the last front line, the Sumy front. And before that, happy birthday to you if your birthday today. So of course, press the like button and subscribe. And we go on to the last front line, the Sumy front. At the Sumy front, we have some major update from the Russian sources. They claim that the Russian front line have moved in this way, declaring a much more expanded zone of control, which includes the securing of Oleksievka and Yunakivka. So there is fighting moving towards Novosibirsk, probably just shelling. I don't think it's a push. And the Ukrainians have control of Contradictions, and probably Andriivka. This is the question mark place. Russians taking Oleksievka and Yunakivka, I think it's believable. A straightened front line here makes sense. So being so close to Andriivka is a question mark. I got a feeling this might be actually Ukrainian, but it might not be a holdable position for Ukrainians. So we shall see. This is just a claim. I think it's just dirty the front line, the map, rather than giving us more clarity. But anyway, we shall see how this goes. As you can see, for the Russians, they have to secure the 3 lines, and Andriivka, they don't claim it. So if the Ukrainians are here, the Russians on the 3 line, how do you hold the position there? It's nearly impossible. And when the Ukrainians have Contradictions, they can actually drone strike you to the death. So I know so this front line, just take it with a pinch of salt. So that's it. So there's one more. The Kusherivka is mentioned again, but not important. I don't think there's a real push over there. And the geolocation of M113 somehow got hit in the north, far north in the Chernihiv region. Yeah, it's interesting to see M113s operating so far away from the active front line, but that's about it. So this is the summary for the past 2 days, for the day of 1387 to 1388 for the 11th to the 12th of December. Thank you for watching. Press the like button, subscribe, check out the other videos that I painstakingly do, and I'll see you guys in the next update.